Thank you all for joining the Access Pacific chapter of the Access User Groups meeting tonight. Tonight's presentation, Eliminating Magic Numbers in VBA, or Transitioning Projects from One Developer to Another. This has been an idea that I've had for a while, and I was very happy that Tom Van Stiphout and Kim Young agreed to step in and actually do the heavy lifting for the presentation. So I appreciate their willingness to help out. Before I turn the meeting over to them, I'm going to run through a couple of slides. I checked the Access roadmap this morning, and nothing new is on the roadmap at this point. They are indicating that SQL editor, the Monaco SQL editor, is launched, as is the modern charts, and there's nothing new on there. Hopefully, they're at the Microsoft MVP meeting later this month. Some of the MVPs will get word on some of their plans, and hopefully there are other things coming down the road in the future. In line with that, we still have the Microsoft Engineering Priorities list that was published on Access Forever. It notes that they're working on bug fixes every month. The most recent one was pretty minor, but they fixed that pretty quickly, but that's one of their focuses. They're also working on the large monitor support, and I understand there have been conversations about that between the Access team and some people who have some ideas on how to make that work. So looking forward to that becoming a reality. And integrated source code control is also on the agenda, and I understand there have been some conversations between Access team members and some people about that. So both of those look really promising. And of course, there's the Discord server. I'll keep mentioning that, although we haven't really seen a lot of activity later. But if you're interested, it's a great place to just hang out and chat with other Access to people who happen to be online. Other chapters, user group meetings. The next one coming up is Alessandro Grimaldi's Access Italia. He's going to be talking about dynamic interfaces. And if you've seen any of Alessandro's work in the past, you know he does some incredible things with drag and drop interfaces. Very, very dynamic indeed. Access Lunchtime, I understand, is canceled for the summit because Maria didn't want to try to do both. Kent hasn't yet published an agenda for his upcoming Access Express Australia meeting. Hopefully by the end of this meeting, Kent will have had inspiration and can share something about what he's going to do next time. For Access Europe next time, Anders, I always mispronounce his name, Anders Abro will be talking about class modules, how, why, and when to use them in the real world. That's the first meeting in April. And Access with SQL Server and Access Basic, there's nothing on their calendar for either of those. And I think it's the same. Juan is probably not planning to have meetings because of the focusing on the MVP Summit coming up. And finally, there's an Access Day, which is an in-person workshop seminar. It's the Friday following, I believe that's the Friday following the summit, isn't it? The 28th? He still has registration open, so if you happen to be in Redmond, you can drop by and meet Armin and all the other local Access developers. And Carl has been advertising his Access DevCon in Vienna. So that one will be virtual. And if you want to join, you can join via Zoom or Teams. He uses Teams and participate in that. So that's pretty much all I know. Does anybody else have any interesting Access related news to share?
George, I'm not sure what the date of it is. I'll try and dig out a link to it later, but the UK Access User Group, not many people here will be involved, but they're doing an in-person event in Oxford again in April, May, something like that. I'll see if I can dig out a link for you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't put that on there because I didn't think that anybody was going to travel that far.
Oh, they'll go back from Mexico.
Yeah, Paul might yeah. So yeah, there we go. We have two of you. So yeah, thank you. If you'll put it in, I'll make sure it gets on the slide for next time. Anything else related to Access that anybody wants to share? Okay. All right, then with no further ado, then I will introduce our meeting, eliminating magic numbers, transitioning projects from one developer to another. This is actually, like I say, this is something I've been thinking about, not in this context for quite a while. I've been trying to find someone to replace me as the president of this chapter. And so in thinking about that, I keep thinking, what could I do to make it more appealing for someone to want to step in and do this? Because I get a lot of satisfaction out of it, but there's a lot of work involved. So I kept thinking, what can I do to sweeten the pot that might encourage somebody to take over? And that led me to think, well, okay, what would I do in a situation where I was trying to transition an Access project? What kinds of things would I look for as the incoming developer to make it easier or more effective, more efficient to take over an existing project? And I started to think, well, maybe there are some things that are interesting there that I could think about. So I reached out to some people and got ideas, and both Kim and Tom, when I started asking them about this, agreed that they had quite a bit of experience, quite a bit of knowledge about how to do it, and both of them agreed to come and do the presentation. So here we are, ready for Tom and Kim to tell us about their strategies for making a smooth transition between developers. With that, I'll turn the time over to you and take it away. I'll stop sharing. Tom, if you want to go ahead.
Yep. There we go. All right, George. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a fun topic to think about. Kim and I both, have decades of experience and done dozens of projects, and you do indeed learn some things that maybe not all of it applies to every situation, but I think a number of things you will recognize or will maybe think about next time you are in this kind of situation. So let me start by introducing the presenters. Kim Young, President of Access All-Stars, is my co-presenter here today. Hi, Kim.
Hi, everyone.
And tell me a little bit about your experience. As I can see here, you've worked with a variety of environments.
Yes, I've had a variety of environments and languages and team sizes. I've been on a team where we had a 7-year project. It was my second day at the company, and I found out I was going to not be part of IT, and we were going to develop a product for the company. And there were 4 of us that went through that, and we ended up with 100 developers. It was a huge effort. It took that's one way you look at a project, right? When it's that big, you have to be organized, you have to have standards. I've been on small teams where I'm the cook, the bottle washer, and the order taker all at the same time. So I've also been voice of the customer. I've worked on numerous different platforms. I've been an employee. A lot of times I become a consultant, and because I'm going to be with them for a couple years, they take me on as an employee, and then we transition back to the consultant role. So I've seen a lot of things, which some of them we'll talk about.
Right. My experience has been as an employee of one company only, ever since I came to the United States some 35 years ago. And I've been the software development manager at Kinetic IT in Phoenix, Arizona. And we do custom software for our clients on the Microsoft stack, some of it with Microsoft Access and Office products, the majority of it actually nowadays with .NET and web applications. Of course, that has changed over the years. And I've always been involved with customer relations, analysis, trying to keep projects on track. And often this was taking over projects from others. Sometimes it was development from scratch, and so a wide variety of experience doing these things. So the two of us, I think, have different perspectives, which is great. And hopefully we can share some of that with you today. First of all, we have to point out that every situation is different. Not two projects alike, and things that we might suggest may apply to some situations and not to others. Sometimes you'll be an employee, sometimes you'll be a consultant. Maybe it's a fixed bid project or it's a time and materials project. You will certainly run that project differently. Some industry sectors have their own standards. If you're thinking of, let's say, the financial world, probably runs quite differently than a small company that is just looking for some help with a small access application. Is this application a mission critical one, or is it really more on the periphery of it? We have both certainly worked on projects where, if it's down for a day, that's a disaster. If it's down for a week, the company is in trouble. And so you will deal with these projects differently depending on how critical they are. Sometimes you get involved with a project where the customer is quite sophisticated and already has certain standards in place, be they programming standards, be they how we go about testing, signing off on the next version, rolling out the version to the company, and others, they have no idea about this and are looking for you to guide them with that. Which brings me to your standards, my standards. As a programmer, you probably have standards. I think you should have standards and say, there are certain projects I would love to work on. There are some other ones that really need to, be brought up to standard before I can even be productive here. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. But I think it's important to know where you stand as a developer. How do you feel about working on a database that misses all the quality markers that we know about good database design? Are you going to say, boy, I'm hungry, I need a job, so yes, I'm going to work on this thing? Or are you going to negotiate? Are you going to perhaps bow out of that and say, that's just not my project, I'm going to look for something else? So we'll be talking about these things, but keep this in mind, is that these questions do not situation. So often apply to both the incoming and the outgoing and even existing developers, because we'll be talking about quality a lot. And we all want to have quality all the time, not just when we're switching developers. So here's the first one, is understand your work environment. You're coming into a new situation, but this also goes for people who are already working there. You need to understand the other players in this organization. What is your IT department like? I will probably have to interact with them. I will have to ask them to do things for me or allow me to do things on my own. Again, it matters a great deal whether this is a small organization or a larger one, how siloed they are, what their opinion is of Access as a development tool. Are we using a SQL backend, an Access backend? But at the very least, especially when you're the incoming person, you need to know some of what they are about and how I can, open discussions with them and get support for the project that we're going to be doing. I already briefly touched on this. You'll need to know what the company standards and procedures are. Some companies have them clearly documented. Sometimes you deal with companies that don't, and perhaps you need to define some of them yourself. We'll touch on that a little bit later as well. If there are documented standards, how are they being enforced? For example, some companies will do code reviews. Some don't. Some will have strong deployment strategies and testing strategies, and some do not. And then you need to reflect that back to your own personal standards. Quick fix engineering might be fun and you might look good, but if you throw something over the wall that has been poorly tested and is causing problems, then perhaps you were not following the rules, and perhaps this is even against your personal standards of this. We're just not doing that. We have to follow proper procedure, and let's document some of those procedures so that everyone is aware how we are going to roll out the next version. And Kim, jump in here anytime you like.
Sure. Applications, what am I responsible for? What applications, and are they mission critical? Is this a package? Is it a custom solution? Is it a hybrid? Are you ISO compliant as a company, meaning you're following international standards about how you run your business? I actually had an application where our customer came in and sent their auditors in to audit what we were doing. So we're an independent company. We provide a service, aftermarket service, and I'm sitting with their auditors trying to prove, how do you know you didn't miss any? And I'm like, well, if I knew how to find them, we'd make more money. So that's kind of a negative, right? So you have to understand who you're going to be interacting and what are your responsibilities and where do they begin and end. And part of that we'll talk about more is what is your sign-off process? How's what you worked on decided? How's that chosen from what the customers, your customers of your application have asked you for? How do you test it? How do they test it? Integration testing, system testing from start to finish. What is your process? So you need to understand what you're going to be responsible for.
Yep. In addition to that, it's also, what parts of the organization are involved in these application of perhaps multiple, which business units deal with this application, where are they located? Maybe we have multiple locations, maybe we are spread out over multiple time zones. But certainly you'll need to have some information about the kinds of units that are related to your application, and especially the people who head up those groups, because those are the people that you probably be interacting with the most. We often call them power users. They're not necessarily the managers of a department, let's say the shipping department, but there is typically someone who is a power user, who is the one who would be there for testing, who would be there to ask questions of, to explain what the application does or how it needs to be improved. And we want to meet them and talk with them. And Kim, I think you take it a little bit further even.
Yes, to me, I like to stand behind people and watch them use the applications that we build. And I can't tell you how many times I've said, so why are you clicking on that now? Like, I would have thought you would have done that after you did this, because you get information from senior leadership about what they want the application to do, but the people who do the job, you need to know what they're doing. I had with and I got to go to where they were unloading the trucks. They were a just-in-time business, and information that accounting wanted wasn't getting entered on the dock, and they were trying to figure out what was the issue. And, when we stood and watched them work, it became very obvious what the issue was. What we wanted them to enter wasn't required, so they just skipped over it because they're in a hurry. I mean, this was literally items came to the warehouse, were taken off a truck and put on a truck to be sent out to the store. They never actually make it to the warehouse floor. So there's huge volumes of product being moved. So again, watching people actually use your application, you'll learn a great deal about what you could do to make it better for them. And I like to be seen as part of their team, not just the person they call when they have a problem, right? Not that I don't want them, I want them to call me when they have a problem, but I want to try to get in front of that. So I view power users as your greatest help in taking over someone else's project or your own, for that matter.
Yep. Okay, so in addition to understanding your work environment, there's also the project itself. The scenario here is you're the incoming developer, you're taking over a project. And for me, at least, one of the very first things that I do is take time to assess what we're dealing with. What is the database, the quality of the database design, the quality of the code? And there's a number of ways you can do this. Thinking about the database design, you could, of course, open the relationships window. If it's empty, that will tell you something. If you click on that button, say show all relations, and maybe some MSys tables show up, and that's it. That tells you something. You can use a variety of tools. There are some scanners, code scanners available. We have a slide later on with a few links to some of them. Years ago, I wrote my own, and I just want to take a brief look at what I'm doing. And I'm essentially gathering about 10 data points or so that tell me something about the quality of the application within like 5 minutes. So here's an example. I run a scanner against the database. And what do we see here? We have a file size. We have 2 relations. So immediately I already know that we have way too few relationships. Essentially, there are none, more or less. And so that is going to be a problem. Not shown here in the header, it probably should be, is there are 60 tables in this particular database, 60 tables, they're listed here. So with 60 tables, 474 queries, that's way too many. So I'm thinking there are a lot of queries that are not in use anymore. There are queries with an underscore and the year number. Give me the data for this year or the data for this person. That are maybe temporary queries, but I cannot think of an application that would have so many queries with 60 tables. 24 forms, I believe that. A little bit on the low side, maybe. 7 reports. That's good. Macros, 1 module. So this person is macro programmer. So what's shaping up in my mind is there's no sophisticated VBA code. There's hardly any VBA code whatsoever. There could still be some code behind, of course. But we might have a not very sophisticated user interface here. Otherwise, we would probably have more VBA code. So that's kind of the header here. And then for each individual table, we record 7 parameters. How many records are there? Okay, so this table is not in use, apparently. How many fields does it have? How many required fields? So as you kind of look down, hardly any required fields in this database, in any of the tables. And so that's a problem. You cannot really have a customer table without the customer name being required. I'm afraid if I crack open the customer table, we're going to see blank, 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 followed by AAA. Unique indexes, well, most tables have at least one because they have a primary key, so good there. I'm glad for that. Very few additional indexes. So there's no indexes that help speed up some of the sorting and filtering and reporting that we might often do. And again, no relations. So here, within 5 minutes, we have an idea about this database. We can also look at the object names and see that spaces are being used. We have copies of tables in here. There are some old guys, export errors. So, it's not a very sophisticated application, more than likely. So that's just part of, give me some time to assess the database, and we can, take similar steps for the code quality. Typically, what I do is I just literally crack it open, and I kind of thumb through the modules. That particular example doesn't have any. But for an application that does have significant VBA, you just kind of get a first assessment. Is option explicit there? Are the procedures more or less, well structured, well named, not too long? When I just briefly read some of the code, does it seem like there's an organized mind at work? This is my crayon for code is, I'd like to see an organized at work. I'd like to see that things are approached the same way in different parts of the application. Or perhaps I can see the hand of several developers in this application. If there is a longer history with multiple developers, you can often recognize their style. And that's all good to know. And again, probably I would use some of the code scanners to see if there's anything else that I can glean from that. Maybe I'll do some searches for certain keywords. I would like to see, are there any declarations of Windows API calls or other calls? Are there, let's look at the references, yes, to see if there's any unusual references. Is it just the 4 basic ones, or are there a dozen additional ones, maybe from Office, maybe from third-party tools? Again, within 15 minutes of doing this kind of work, you get an initial idea of the quality of the code that you're dealing with. And in our company, this happens actually before we have a first meeting with the client. I always ask for them to send the ACCDB ahead of the first meeting. If they're not willing to do that, that in itself is already a sign that, unless they have a very good reason for it, maybe this customer is not completely sold on the idea of doing this project. But in the vast majority of cases, they will send the code and will do this kind of assessment. Some other things you might look at, very important, data security. Again, if this is a more sophisticated environment, how is the data being protected against misuse, misappropriation? Are we talking about a SQL backend? Probably. If security is is more of a concern. But even with SQL Server, some people leave all the doors wide open, and others have taken the time to actually secure the database and create groups of users that have certain rights and so on. So if that's the case, you would need to spend some time understanding all of that, and probably also talking to some of the stakeholders about what their goals really are with regards to protecting their data. For some company, it is simply, people could make a copy of the front end and back end and take it to their next employer. And this has happened. And this is not a hypothetical. And then what do you do about that? Or how do you prevent that from happening? Some companies will appreciate that you bring this up, even if it's currently not something that was on their radar screen. It's important to think about that. Change control, that of course goes into how do we even determine what we're going to be working on. In our company, we use DevOps, Microsoft DevOps, to store all the information about the project. So this is all the user stories and all the bugs that have been collected and the tasks that need to be executed. And that's our one and only source of information. And then together with the main stakeholders, we decide what is going to be worked on next. Here's a couple of things that we're going to be selecting into this next sprint that we're going to be working on. But whatever your process is, it can be an email, it can be an Excel file somewhere. That's less important than that there is some kind of a process that everyone recognizes. And that if there are issues coming up while we're in development, that we know how to deal with that. Is this a bug that needs to be fixed right away, out of band, and a new version deployed? Or can it wait until the next sprint? Whatever the case may be. The idea that there is a process is more important than exactly how you do it. Kim, you've been very much involved with testing. I have something to say about that, but what do you want to say here?
Sure. So testing is not just your responsibility as the developer or part of the development team. Your user community has to get involved, and there's beta testing. That's what you're doing. Then you go through your users saying, through all the tickets or through your ticketing system or however you get your user stories that you're going to work on. They sign off on those, but they haven't looked at the system as a whole. And you need to get that then regression testing going. And you don't have to write the regression testing. As a matter of fact, you should not be writing the regression testing. The testing should have been documented before you started. So if you don't have that strict of a sort of a Scrum process or how you work, what you can do is enlist those power users that I pointed out earlier and have them and say, when this release goes out, I need you to put together how you're going to have tested what is your must work. These things must work and work, even though we've been changes from all these departments, so that my department is not down. Like I can get that you don't like the order that the tab key works or things like that, but so enlist them. And what I find is they end up really, they like being involved, the users, and they come up with great documentation, and then they use that to actually train new employees who join their group. And so that becomes theirs. And, until we go through all the tickets, they all get signed off on, Then people start their testing and they go, oh, this isn't working because, that department over there just broke something that we expected to come to us over here. And then you solve those so that by the time you roll out the code, you don't have 25 people standing next to your desk with their hair on fire because something they desperately need isn't working. Now, that doesn't happen immediately, that they come together with this perfect list. But I would say it depends how often you release. We could only release once a month. It was a particular time of the month when that could go out because we were waiting for client files and whatnot. But within about 6 to 8 months, they were rock solid. Like I stopped having people showing up next to my desk with their hair on fire. Oh, the tab key doesn't seem to be working here the way I expected it to. Okay, we can put that in a hot fix. So that works out well. So you may walk in and it may not be structured and organized testing that you should be responsible for, helping them understand what they need to do and how that testing should work. And again, those power users are your greatest allies. They know the system. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a system and then I'm obsessing over this thing over here and they go, oh, we don't even use that anymore. Okay, great. Well, then we should get it out if no one's using it because I'm spending a lot of time trying to get it up to speed. And lo and behold, none of you do it. So you would never know that. People don't come to you and say, oh, we don't do that anymore. So use those power users. They're your greatest allies.
Another couple of elements regarding again to that project assessment. We're still in the very early phases. What comes in, what goes out is always important, of course, and it may not always be obvious. So looking at the code, but also talking to your power users will likely, help you there. How do we interact with other systems? Is there automation going on with Excel or with QuickBooks or who knows what? All of these things are important early on because it helps you understand the overall parameters of the project. Another element that I feel is very important is the next one: negotiate what I'm allowed to do without approval. In our company, we have contracts with our clients that are time and materials. So basically it works like this, that they tell us what to work on, we then work on that, and however many hours that is in this week, that gets billed times our hourly rate. And we send them a timesheet that says, this is all that we worked on, and here's an invoice that corresponds with that. Sometimes things that where the decision makers are not available, or there are things that come up where they're so highly technical that it's very difficult to explain to people. Sometimes there are things regarding code quality, for example. I'm working in this area and I see something that's just needs to be fixed because this is not the right way to do it. I don't want to have to go back to the customer and ask for approval for every hour that I work on some of these things. There has to be some kind of understanding between the various parties, and that works better, of course, if you already know each other. But even from the beginning, we actually have that on the first work order, is that there is time set aside to work on things that are currently unspecified, that are at the discretion of the developer. And talking with the customer about that and getting a feeling for what they are comfortable with is important. And if they see an extra 2 or 4 hours a week on these kinds of activities, are they okay with that? And I hope that they are, because I think these are important things that developers can do while they're working in this area to take care of a few additional items to make the application better. Without getting into well, this is just how I feel, and this is, my style, so I'm going to change all of this. You have to have an understanding, I think, of what is the level of severity of the items that I'm working on. But anyway, so have that be clear in the open that this is part of software development. I'm not just working on the individual tasks. I'm also working on raising the quality of the application as a whole. If I see issues, I need some wiggle room to be able to work on that and get paid for that. Another thing very early on is, are there any tools that we should buy that I'm aware of, that I can find, that will help us be more successful? Things where we can either have add-ins for our application or third-party tools, other components that we may need that we can buy that can sometimes, save a lot of money and reduce risk by buying something off the shelf. One that comes to mind is FMS has an email, total access emailer or something like that tool. I've never actually used it myself, but if there was a customer who says, the purpose of this application is to email our customers, my first instinct would not be, oh, I'm going to be writing a lot of Outlook automation code and writing a scheduler to go send emails on a timer. No, I think I'll be looking at tools like that already have a good track record and that might be incorporated into the application. So it's important that you're aware of what's available in the marketplace. Forums like this talk about tools all the time. And early on in the project, this is the right time to bring this up and say, we need to invest a few $100s here and there on tools to make us all more efficient.
It's funny that you mentioned the email tool, Tom, because I have actually used that at a client.
Oh, you have?
And I think we should have said in the beginning, these are, we only have this big list because we've been doing this a long time and walked into a lot of landmines. And then you go, oh, okay, I'm putting that on my list of things to check for in the future. I can't believe I should have checked for that, but I guess I need to check for that. So I'm going to add it to my list. So it isn't like you come out and you just get started and to do all these things. You just don't. But we're trying to give you our, things that we've learned over the years and why we think they're important. And so that they're on your radar and you'll learn over time why those things matter for those people who are just getting started or haven't been in this long or became developers because they loved coding, but it wasn't what they started out doing.
For the outgoing developer and also for the existing developer, because this is mostly code quality issues. So here we hark back to the magic numbers tease that we had for this presentation. For all of you who are familiar with Northwind 2, you'll have noticed that we use enums quite a bit. For example, there are enums that basically mimic status tables, static tables in general, lookup tables, like the order status and so on. Because then you can write self-describing code, right? Enum status dot open is a lot more descriptive than for. And so if you are the outgoing developer, and if you hadn't done it yet, making a pass through the code and cleaning up some of the things that, it's just hard to read for the new person would certainly be helpful. Another one, of course, would be adding comments as to why we're doing this particular thing. I do not want to see comments that describe the what, typically. I've seen comments that say increment x by 1, and on the x equals x by 1 plus 1. That doesn't really help me. and that was a waste of your time to type that out. I can read code, but I would like to understand why this is important to do that now. What's the overall goal here of this procedure? I think the next one comes from Kim, but I certainly agree with that. Call out clever code. I thought that was pretty cool of me to write it in this way. Okay, thank you for pointing this out to me, because these are sometimes the blocks of code that require more attention or more testing. Because when we try to be clever by half, it sometimes backfires, right?
Yeah, that would be, I think if you think it's really clever, you probably shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. I always ask for, tell other developers, write boring code that everyone can readily understand.
Right.
If you have to be clever, okay, then, at least document it very carefully. But it behooves you to take a little extra time to see if there is a simpler way to achieve the same thing. Naming convention, I don't think we have to talk much about that.
One of the things that I like to do is I create tables and they are prefixed APP underscore so that they're up at the top and they're all together. And in that, I have one table that is abbreviations.
Hmm.
If you're using abbreviations in the application because the name of something is really long, then put that in the table. So someone could find the abbreviation that you're using and go, oh, that's talking about this. I have a client, one of theirs is it's chain of title, but everywhere in the application it was COT. Well, I don't know enough about their business to know that meant chain of title. So I learned from the power users that's what that meant. So I started an abbreviation table. Should I, you always have to think about your own succession planning. What happens if you get hit by the bus? I mean, I know you're not going to care then what's happening, but you should while you're working there to make it so that you're not stuck on this app forever because no one else can pick it up. You want to move on and do new things and try new things. So standard abbreviations. I don't care what your convention is. I just want you to use it consistently and tell me what it is. Like I use FRM, I use SFRM for subform or whatever you're doing. Just put it in a table with a description. And if you put them in the app section, they're easy for people to find because it's always together, always at the top. So I'm doing that.
The next one is, when you're the new developer, everything is equally important, right? Initially. And you don't really know that there's 20% dead code, dead objects in this application. And certainly you wouldn't know which 20%. And so if you're the outgoing developer, taking some time to either remove it if it can be, but be careful about that, because we don't want to break the application necessarily. So removal can only be done as part of a sprint, a development phase whereby you do that and then release a new version. And it goes through the same testing scenarios that we've already talked about. Not just, I'm just going to remove this because I know it's not being used. Well, do you really know that? Sometimes renaming things, I like Z prefix, so that the objects are at the bottom of a list. But whatever you do, you certainly have to be careful there. But at least they can be identified, right? This next one is also super important. The development process is not necessarily a single, throw a single ACCDE on the server and call it good. Sometimes the deployment process can be quite a bit more complex. And so knowing what it is, and perhaps in some situations, knowing who needs to be involved in it. It may not all be you. It may be that the scripts need to go to IT to be vetted before they can be deployed to the production database. Whatever the process is, you want to know what it is. And hopefully it's documented so that we can follow that process every time.
And if it's not documented, you can start documenting it as
You
you
have to start it. Yeah.
learning, you know.
Yeah. Share your business knowledge. That also goes into, make yourself available for meetings during the transition. Sometimes people part on good ways, on good terms, sometimes not so good. But as a professional, I think it would be very nice if you can make yourself available for transition meetings. That doesn't have to be free. That can be negotiated. It can also be negotiated if you should be on call, quote unquote, for a certain period of time, a month or whatever, where you agree to respond to questions from the incoming developer within 24 hours. That is negotiated. But I think it is important that consider these steps, and in many cases, I think from a professional level, you should really try to make yourself available. We've certainly had a few situations in our company where people were available, and we did have a handoff meeting of 2 or 3 hours where we went through the database design, we went through the major code, we did a demo of the main functionality of the application. It is so valuable. I mean, if you were charging 5x your normal rate, it would still be a very worthy thing of doing. And so, yeah, I can't stress that enough. We always do it in our company. We make ourselves available if we're the outgoing ones, and when we're the incoming ones, that's one of the first questions is, can we have a meeting with the person who's leaving? Are you still in contact with them? Not always, but hopefully.
So this was about your wish list. So if you have an opportunity to talk to the existing developer, and you can ask yourself these questions, what are the things you wish you had gotten to in your application, in the application? Things you wanted to fix, things you wanted to change. What is your wish list? And then I would ask them, if I was the incoming developer, I would ask the outgoing developer, so why didn't you get to work on them? What was the hindrance? Because you also want to know, is your boss going to be like, you never have time to go back and do the right thing because you're, slamming in a production fix and there's a better way to do it, but it would take longer and they never let you go back? I would want to know that if I was coming in, because those are the things that don't come out when you're interviewing or talking to leadership, about those sorts of things. So I'm just saying, so why do you think you didn't get to them? Do you find out they're really doing, like a 12-hour day every day? I'd want to know that too. So I think if you have an opportunity, and if you're there and you're, an existing employee, you should ask yourself, why I have this list and how come I never have time to do that? And that kind of goes back to what Tom said earlier about saying, I need a certain amount of time where I don't have to ask permission, that I can work on things, that I can do these things. Because I've done it, I have applications that I wrote in the middle 90s that people are still using today. And sometimes I don't hear from them for years. And then I go back and I look and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Like, why did I do it like that? There's a better way to do this. I did it like that because I didn't know there was a better way to do it, but I do now. So I want to clean that up or fix it or do what needs to be done there. I look back and go, or I made this really complicated and it didn't have to be this complicated. I can fix this. So I want to be able to do those things. But, you go back and you look at your early applications and you go, I'm not exactly sure I'm super proud of this. I'm glad no one else has seen it except me. I have a few of those. So why didn't you get to them? Why didn't you do it? And it's a good to do even if it work. And that goes into what some of Tom had said earlier.
So here are some of those initial changes that I think we want to make when we get started on the project. We want to get the database design up to standard. Database designers don't really disagree that thou shalt have referential integrity. Thou shalt have required fields. If we have bad data today because this was not in place, then we need to triage that because we are moving in that direction where this bad data no longer can exist. And with every application that I've ever worked on in these many years, if it is an application of a certain size that has been used for a certain amount of time that did not have these quality markers in place, I can always find bad data. I usually focus first on the money and say, hey, here's $23,000 that you never knew existed in the database. It was for order line items that are free floating. They are not connected to an order. They're not connected to a customer. Somebody entered that was the intent to ship this product, but it never happened. Whatever it is, and companies sometimes are really stunned to see that their database is not as good as they thought it was. It runs our business every day. It should be good. No, not always. And the same thing with coding quality. I've worked on applications where an ACCDE could not be created because the application didn't compile. Well, that's going to be fixed. That's going to be fixed right away. That's not something you can just leave out and say, well, you really wanted to hire me for these reports. Let's work on that first. No, this is my personal standard, and I guess my company standard as well, is that there are certain things that just have to get taken care of right away. And I'm willing to let a lot of things slide. But option explicit is going to be in every module. There's just no two ways about it. And if that causes compile errors, then they will be fixed. And if that takes a few hours, then so be it. Some other things that don't always apply, but again, very good to think about it. The first one here, tracking fields. You would say, I don't really need that. Come on. Never used before, and I don't even know data macros. Well, the code is ready for you to use in Northwind 2, the developer edition, because we are actually doing that, and all the code to apply data macros and have the tracking fields there, auto-populate, is ready for you to use. So no more excuses there. In some applications, every button click is logged. Who did what when? It also helps you find that code, because if a button is never clicked, then I guess it's not in use. In some applications, every run of a report with its criteria is being logged. Doesn't have to be every application that needs that, but some of them do. Some industries are more precise about that than others. Crash detection is another one. I have some code that I use in most applications because, especially as a new guy, I want to know if my application is crashing all the time, because that probably means that there's something wrong with the installation of that workstation. Maybe an office repair is needed, whatever. Corruption, same thing. It doesn't necessarily get reported to you, but you would want to know about it, especially early on when you're new. Version control, at the very least, the application will have a version number that you can find in the title bar or somewhere in a about dialog or wherever you want it to be, so that we know that everyone is on version 2.1 of this application. And that's the only version that people can be on, because we have some way to distribute the application to everyone. And if someone is a straggler still on 2.0, next time they start it up, they either hopefully get the new version right away, or they get some warning or error to say, you're on an old version, too bad, so sad. Initial changes, testing procedures. We've already talked about that, so I'll move on from there. So only then are you ready to work on items on the to-do list. There are certain things that are just too important. They have to be done right up front.
One of the things too that I find we don't think about very often is we plan disaster planning. I need to be able to restore the whole database. We got hacked. We have a disk problem. I was at a client watching, and they produced reports every 30, and they came out on a printer that sat by the admin's desk, and she would fax them out the next day to the client. There was no other copy of that report, and it couldn't be reproduced. So when they had to unplug the printer and do something to it, suddenly all of them were gone. So we didn't plan for the printers not working. Where are these reports going? How did they get saved? So it's thinking about those sorts of things. These were critical. Yes, if everything was working, it worked fine. They had all this disaster planning in for big disasters, but the fact that the cord got unplugged from the printer and the buffer emptied and the reports were just gone, nobody planned for. So the logging of the button clicks, knowing the criteria so that you could run the reports again and do what you needed to, I think those things matter. Now, you may have to start your to-do list, but you should be thinking about getting that. What happens if this report gets lost in the process of us producing it as part of our regular what we do?
Yep. I'm going to go to my last slide, basically repeating some of what we've already talked about, is how important it is that you understand the business. It's not enough, assuming this is not a 1-week engagement, you're taking over a project for the duration. It's important to understand the business, understand your power users, make them your friends, get a demo from them, hear from them, and not just from management, what the application does, how they use it, and that will come back to help you doing development. Of course, you need to understand the business itself. How does this application further the goals of the organization? Jargon, let's skip that one for now. Use your leverage. You are the incoming developer in this scenario. And this is a good time to speak up and say, this is how I'd like to do this. Is that something that we can all agree on? We're going to make these improvements. We're going to strengthen our procedures. We're going to get these power users involved. Is that something that everyone can support? This is the time for you to kind of interview them and understand that this is the time when you can say yay or nay to this project, assuming you have the luxury of being able to do that. But this is the right time to bring this up, not 3 or 6 or 9 months into the project. So use that. We're going to skip this slide, but it will be in the presentation later on posted online. These are some of the tools that we would recommend as part of that. Let's look at tools at the beginning of the project. And that's the end of this presentation. We want to hear from you what your advice would be, either as the outgoing or the incoming developer.
Thank you very much, Tom and Kim. That was even better than I had hoped. One thing that kept coming to my mind as I was listening, I'm giving people a chance to formulate their questions, so I'll just bloviate for a minute while people are thinking about what they want to say. That one of the things that came to my mind as I was listening is that kind of what matters is not so much the core technical writing code, building tables kind of thing, but all of the structure that you build around the process, all of the discussions with the client and the discussions with the power users, all of the considerations, the what if scenario, what happens if the printer goes down, all of those other processes are critical to a successful transition. And the actual database itself is only one part of that whole process. And so expanding our thinking beyond, well, if I just tweak this bit of code, it'll be fine, to how does this fit into the overall project? How, what is the overall goal? We're helping our customers make money. And so being a developer encompasses a lot more than just sitting down and writing code.
Yeah, you're right. I realized that this morning as well as I was reflecting on this presentation. It doesn't happen very often, I think, that you have a presentation with zero code. I haven't even started Microsoft Access. I'm not showing a single line of code, because this is really at the project management level, at the development discipline level, you know. And yes, those soft skills are super important for the success overall.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a much bigger picture. I think developers kind of come in two flavors. There's people that just want to write code, so they want a very detailed specification of what they build it, and they're happy, and that gives them satisfaction in their work. And then there's others who view this differently. It's, I want to be an integral part of the organization. I want to be valuable because my power users and my users come to me. I can go to them. I'm part of their team. I'm not just this person that they only call on the phone when they have a problem. I'll say, I was thinking about this. I think we could do this better, don't you? And what are your thoughts on this? And I'll start the conversation. So they aren't coming to me with requirements. I'm going to them. So it depends what sort of development environment you have. And I think we had some questions in the window. Typically, I make it about how do we do this assessment and know when I'm interviewing with wherever the process starts, I make it very clear that I will only do this project if I am allowed to regularly interact with the power users. That this isn't you don't get to go bother them or talk to them. I don't work well in that environment. That doesn't work for me. So in terms of getting pushback about it, the users usually love it, right? That's someone's coming to listen to them, and they don't feel like they're just putting tickets in and there we go, and they never work on my stuff, or they never do what I asked them to, or that's not what I meant, or it's okay. It doesn't, you need that. I think that connection is what made, when I look back at my career, I have people I still talk to that I haven't worked with in, a decade or more, because we created a relationship. We became friendly. We meet, once or twice a year, and we have dinner, and we all talk about where our lives have gone and what's happened. So
there's one other question from David. David, it's Tom and Kim. Do you usually start a project with 2 or 3 needs assessments where you understand the business and have a chance to assess the personalities of users?
oh yes, as soon as I get there, I may have a list of tickets. The first people I'm going to go talk to are them. I'm going to meet with them, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to have them show me how to use the application, how they use the application. I usually get a list like what's annoying. I ask them, so what annoys you? What's not working the way you think it should? And they may not even have work tickets yet, but I'm going to start a list so that I create that relationship right up front. And you start to learn who's, the personalities and how you deal with them from those meetings, and they get a chance to know you. And it's okay. So one of the things that I would say here too is if you work on mission critical applications, you have to have done a lot of work in being able to set up the code and figure out very quickly what's happened. Because the more time your application is down, the more your users begin to distrust it and they want to blame the computer. So you want to be able to say, no, no, no. Mary changed that on last Thursday, and that's how come this happened now. If you can walk to senior leadership, we've had a problem. Here's what happened. It happened. Here's what we're going to do to fix it. And this is how long it's going to take. Or we're going to put a Band-Aid on it for now, and we'll get a new release out over the weekend. If you can tell, if you walk in and you say that, everybody calms down. I mean, you know, if you've not ever worked on a mission critical application and you ever end up working on one, you will find out that the minute something happens, the guy in the corner office with the window is going to be at your desk. So you need to set yourself up in advance for saying, okay, we know what happened. Now we got to figure out how we're going to happen. I'll get back to you in an hour. Give me an hour so that you can organize your thoughts and say, here's what we're going to do to fix this in the short term and the long term. And then everybody calms down and goes back to work and you're fine. If you can't explain it quickly, their confidence goes down. Well, I don't know. The computer just does things. If I had $1 every time someone said that, I'd be so rich. It'd be funny. Because it's never that the computer just does it and you weren't involved. It's like, no, you were involved. Someone was involved. We'll find out who that is, and we'll learn how to fix it and make sure this doesn't happen again.
And this is where the tracking fields and so on come in, and logging the button clicks. Again, not for every application, but in this mission critical scenario, it can save your hide, and it can show that yes, indeed, someone did click the delete button, even though they forgot about it.
Right.
Exactly. So one of the things that I used to do when I was still working is I would make it a point, if we had a SQL Server backend, I would make it a point to call the DBA and just introduce myself, tell him my name, and offer to buy him or her the beverage of his choice or her choice. And most of them didn't take me up on it. But by establishing that contact and the willingness to engage in a different level, I can think of at least 2 times when being able to call, say, hey, Jim, you know what? We've got a problem. Can you help me fix it? I got much more direct and immediate response by reaching out ahead of time and letting them know that we're people and we share a common goal here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
Ron has a question. Are you allowed to contact the users with questions from things you find in the log?
I am. I mean, I don't usually, so I don't usually ask permission. I ask for forgiveness. So I feel like I need to talk to the users, I go talk to them and say, okay, so here's some stuff going in the law. I'm assuming, Ron, you have some sort of a scenario that you're thinking of.
Yes, I mean, actually, just recently we were having some data errors in the purchase order receiving area, and I was working out all the code trying to figure out why this was happening, and logging a lot of entry information about the purchase orders. And we found out that some processes that run at the end of the day were interfering with the receiving process if they were still in that process of doing it. So.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing how often I find that. Or else, like you said about computer problems, I log when there's dropouts on the network.
Oh, okay.
So it makes it easy to find those computers that could be corrupted to database or data.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
To an Access backend, there's a runtime error that occurs typically. And if you have a centralized error handler, like you see in Northwind 2 and all good applications, I'd like to say, then you already know that something happened before people even reported it. But certainly it gets logged at the very least. And perhaps it gets logged with, the name of the user, the name of the workstation, the date and time it happened, of course. And since these are important errors, maybe it even generates an email to you so that you're already
The
aware
logging
of it.
greatly improved my applications because you find a lot of errors in the code from errors being logged in the system.
Right. So I know, Tom, your company's policy is that all of your code has to be proprietary. I use VB Watchdog, and what I like about it is I don't have to put error handling in every procedure because it will handle every error that occurs with or without it. So for the price of that tool, and it's a one-time fee, and you can deploy it in as many applications as you need to. If you have a development team, I think there's pricing for that. I can highly recommend that. I get an email from clients. I have it set up so that they email me if they get an error, and we go from there. So that can also be very helpful because the tool does an excellent job of telling you exactly where the error occurred. You're not kind of backing into it.
Right.
Okay. So does anybody else have a suggestion that we have not yet covered? Something that you systematically look for or routinely look for or insist on? Okay. Well, pretty thorough then. I'm going to stop the recording then. And before I do that, I want to thank Kim and Tom again for helping me out. I went to them with questions and ended up with a better presentation than I could have ever hoped to come up with. And I'm in your debt once again. We worked together on the Northwind 2 team a couple of years ago now. I was
Well,
looking
thank you
back.
for having us, George.
Yeah, and it was like, as Kim said, hey, it's time to get the band together again. And we almost did. We're only short one person, but it was a pleasure and an honor to have them participate. So thanks again.